My name is Alaa Murabit. I'm the founder and president of Voice of Libyan Women, a women's empowerment organization based in Zawiya, Libya. The Voice of Libyan Women initially started following the revolution. And the main reason we began it was because during the revolution we noticed that a lot of women were active. And following the revolution we felt like that was slowly decreasing. How do I say this nicely? We began focusing mainly on political empowerment of women. And we noticed that it was very difficult to ensure the political empowerment of women if they didn't have economic empowerment. So we then started focusing on the two. What we misplaced was, like what happened, for example, in Iraq, where women began more political and more economically empowered, slowly became socially unempowered. And so we had to kind of shift what our concentration was on and attempt to do the three at once, which is why our organizational, structure has changed over the past 2 years. I think the important issues for Libyan women after the revolution are the same as they were before the revolution, and are the same as they are for Libyan public in general. This is a country where all citizens have not really had human rights or dignity, and they really have not had the responsibility of respecting other people, which is coming to light post-revolution. You note that the way that the generation that is currently in charge of Libya, being the generation older than us, as well as the generation that currently has the more, let's say, physical control in terms of arms, which is our generation, these two both were raised in a Libya where they were not made to respect others, where they were not made to work for what they were given. And this is the same for both men and women. So the main challenges, I think, for Libyans as a whole is going to be respect, first and foremost. And of course, women are at a disadvantage in this regard simply because they are women in a country where men, simply because they are men, naturally have a bit of respect, right? So that's, I would say, the first and the biggest goal for us is to ensure that women at least understand on their part that, yes, they have rights, but they also have responsibilities. And they have that citizen responsibility that they have to give back to their country in order to gain from it. Well, the reason we made the public service announcements actually is because we initially started last year with something called International Purple Hijab Day on February 13th every year. And that is a day where we go to high schools and universities and discuss with young women about domestic violence, young women and young men. And when we initially began International Purple Hijab Day, we did not have any statistics at all. There are no statistics in Libya for domestic violence. There are no reliable statistics for anything, to be fair. So when we started last year, we actually gave out surveys. And one of the questions on the surveys is, have you experienced domestic violence? And if so, what exactly happened? And prior to giving them the surveys, we gave them a seminar explaining that domestic violence includes somebody threatening you, somebody swearing at you, somebody hitting you. All these are different forms of violence, right? And we got it was over 85% who said that they've experienced some form of domestic violence within their own homes. And not including extended family. That means brothers and fathers and mothers and sisters. So following that, we decided this year to do the Noor campaign. And the idea behind the Noor campaign was simply to ensure that there was more awareness about what domestic violence is, because there is a huge lack of understanding. People assume it's only if you're hit, and only if you're hit because you deserved it, or you didn't deserve it, right? If that makes sense. So if I did something wrong and he hits me, that's not violence. He's allowed to do that. My older brother can hit me if I came home late, for example. And there's a misunderstanding about what domestic violence is, and that's actually been given usually by the men in the family or by the father figure in the family. So it was a decision to increase awareness about what domestic violence is. And then also, in order for us to push for any legislative change, we need greater statistics. We cannot simply go and say, well, we think domestic violence is a problem in this country, so let's start getting social worker training in schools. Let's start putting nurses in schools. You can't say this unless you actually have the facts and figures to back it up. So starting in late September, we inshallah are going to high schools, universities, and mosques to conduct seminars and surveys in most cities in Libya, and to speak to both women and men about what they think. A, the prevalence of domestic violence is, and B, if they have it in their own homes. And once we create a greater, I would say, database of information about domestic violence, we can then approach lawmakers and say we need legislative change, or we need social support for these women or for these young boys, if it may be boys. But there just needs to be more information. Unfortunately, there's not. We we are, as an organization, completely unpolitical. We don't have any political party affiliation. I personally have no political affiliation. And yet, because of the fact that we have ensured, regardless of what the issue is, we've always tried to work with all parties equally. Be it political parties or ideologies, whatever it may be. We've done our best to always ensure that everybody has a say, because whether people like it or not, they all have a say in Libya, and they're going to be here for a long time. So we may as well learn to work together. And for that reason, we've had a lot of opposition from the opposing party or the opposing ideology, and usually that will lead to somebody calling us, saying we're affiliated with a particular political party or an ideology or whatnot. But, I mean, that's the vast majority of the opposition. In terms of physical opposition, we haven't had much. Our center's been attacked only once. Only a few members have ever been threatened. Yeah, so in terms of opposition, it's been, the unfortunate thing about Libya is there's a very big black hole where media should be taking a greater role in terms of talking about what local civil society is doing, or talking about different political parties and what their initiatives are or whatnot. And what's happening instead is people are relying on getting their information from media sources like Facebook or like Twitter or whatnot, and then creating their own news, basically.
Yeah.
And so what ends up happening is a lot of rumors are created either about the organization or about members of the organization, none of which are factual, but we don't necessarily have a trusted media source to go through to start to rebuke them, and it just seems like a waste of time to even try. We initially, when I started the Voice of Libyan Women, we created a 5-year plan. Some of the things which we assumed would take us 5 years took us only a matter of months, and some of the things which we assumed would take us only a matter of months will probably take us decades. But I have learned that expectations usually just lead to disappointment. So I would say, on the very general scope, short term would be the hope that the organization can continue to do the work that we would like to do. I'd say one of our goals is to hope that we're actually making some sort of a difference, and that we begin to see actual political will to work on women's rights. Because currently, right now, we're speaking, for the most part, on deaf ears. Another short-term goal of mine would be to see that the women's movement and different women's organizations actually learn to work together, because they are not going to get anywhere with everyone just doing their own thing. And that's very difficult to try to maneuver. Long-term goals would actually be legislative change, mainly in terms of domestic violence and in terms of getting nurses in schools, in terms of retraining social workers in schools, getting different legislation and having that enforced for domestic violence and for violence against women in general, particularly women who choose roles such as lawyers or doctors or members of civil society, where they can be targeted by those who think that women's role is not in public life. So I do think that those changes will take a lot of time, though, and I think that they, again, need information to back them up.
Okay.
Well, during the revolution, women were in my opinion, women were the foundation of the revolution. So they did, in terms of, because here's the idea. We always talk about the young men who fought the war, right? And what people don't understand was, in order for them to fight the war, A, Islamically, they had to get permission from their moms, okay? B, they then needed to get clothed. They needed to be fed. People needed to hide their whereabouts. They needed medicine. I mean, you can't just send a car from point A to point B without the gas, right? So it was very much the same thing. Women were the gas for the revolution. They kind of carried it home. In that regard, though, they then, following the revolution, most women who took leading roles pulled back. And I think a large part of that is a failure in terms of a political failure, in terms of the Libyan transitional government, as well as a failure in civil society, because there was no common goal. When there's a common goal, people tend to unite much quicker and they tend to work much harder. And what we found after the revolution was there were too many goals, and nobody really knew how to get to any of them. So a lot of people said, you know what, this is a waste of my time. I'm going to go home, spend time with my kids and my family, which is fair enough. You can't blame them, especially when there was no, I would say, what's that word? When people have a want to do something because they're getting something, there was no
motivation,
like incentive. There was no incentive, right? So, for example, you have women who worked in civil society for a year, 2 years, and had no incentive to continue working, right? They were not getting supported, so they would go back to their actual jobs as a teacher or whatnot, which could actually bring home something to the family. So, I mean, women following the revolution, you can't really blame the women for not being as involved.
Yeah.
Nobody really gave them the space to be, and a lot of women felt that it was a waste of time to try to take it, if that makes sense.
It's actually something that came up right now. They're talking about the change theory. There's a sociology theory, like in families and stuff like that, where something is going to change, you're going to first have chaos before it improves.
Yeah.
Very basic. She was saying that within civil society, when this happens on a nationwide scale, during that chaos, 70%, 80% of all projects, all CSOs will completely stop. That's what we've had here, because they don't have success and they quit.
Yeah, and I mean, to be fair, when you're looking at it from almost every major issue, people will talk about how security is the major problem in Libya, and it is. It is. And what ends up happening always in a country in conflict or in an insecure country is the first thing to be put under the bus is women's rights, right? Like they completely, and their reasoning is, well, the country's not secure, so we really can't talk about women right now. What they don't understand, though, is if women were utilized in terms of peace building, and if they were spoken to, for example, the mothers of martyrs here in Libya, if they were the ones to take an active role in building bridges, the bridges would probably be built much quicker. Our major, I would say, obstacle is the fact that A, Libyans in general don't want to work together, but B, different factions in Libya don't understand the importance of the other faction. You may not disagree with them, but you still have to respect that they should be at the table with you, and that's what's not happening. Well, Islam plays a large role in our project simply because it plays a large role in A, the country, and B, in our organization, right? Obviously, I'm Muslim. I was raised by very Islamic parents, like very religious, devout parents. And I think what we need to understand is the difference between Islam as a religion and Islam as a political machine, right? And what's happening in Libya, unfortunately, and in many countries around the world, including in the United States, is there's a very large misunderstanding of what Islam is. So what we did was we hoped to highlight that. On February 13th, when we did International Purple Hijab Day, the most common excuse given to us by girls was, no, my father's allowed to hit me Islamically. And, being raised by my father, I kind of assumed that what he had been telling me about men not being allowed to hit women in Islam was probably correct. So we started looking through hadiths and Quranic verses and pinpointing ones where they are commonly misused and commonly misunderstood, and putting them on billboards and on public service announcements like the one you saw to simply highlight that no, Islam is not a religion which promotes the abuse of women. Matter of fact, it prohibits it. And by doing that, we felt that we could open up the conversation at home and simply fight fire with fire, because if we were going to give them scientific statistics or health reasons as to why they should not be accepting abuse in their own home, I feel a lot of girls would go home and tell that to their parents, and their parents would say, well, no, but religiously we can. And so by giving them pamphlets where it says religiously you can't, with religious verses, it's much more difficult to argue. And it allows for, I think, a new conversation to start.
And it stops being, oh, women's rights is a Western ideal.
Yeah. Realistically, Libyans in general, both men and women, don't understand what freedom is. There's a very misunderstood perception of freedom. And they believe it means that you are allowed to do whatever you want with no boundaries. Nobody's in charge of you. If you want something, you can take it. Your boss didn't give you a raise, you can break down his door and demand one. You don't want to go to work today, you don't have to, and you'll still get paid. So I think both men and women in Libya right now need a better understanding of what their civilian responsibility is. And only then can I think genuinely start to demand more rights. Because right now, I mean, it's like you said, it's chaos. There's really nothing else to say, I don't think.
Okay.